Case 1. Lamarcus Davidson. What if a simple date night became the beginning of one of Tennessee's most horrific crimes? On a cold January evening in Knoxville, two young lives collided with unimaginable cruelty. At the center of it was Lamarcus Devall Davidson, a Memphis native who had spent most of his early adulthood in and out of the system. By 2006, he'd finished a 5-year sentence for carjacking and aggravated robbery and moved to Knoxville, renting a small house on Chipman Street. To outsiders, he looked like another ex-convict trying to restart his life, but investigators would soon learn he was anything but. January 6, 2007, started as a normal Saturday for Channon Christian, 21, a University of Tennessee student, and Christopher Newsom, 23, a carpenter. They planned dinner, a movie, then a party. They never made it. Around 9 that evening, Christian's Toyota 4Runner was carjacked at gunpoint. The couple was forced inside, restrained, and driven straight to Davidson's Chipman Street house. Waiting there were 5 offenders: Davidson, his half-brother Letelvis Cobbins, George Thomas, Vanessa Coleman, and Eric Boyd. Over the next 2 days, both victims were subjected to extreme violence. Newsom was bound, assaulted, marched to nearby railroad tracks, shot, and set on fire. Christian endured prolonged torture before dying of asphyxiation. Her body was stuffed into trash bags and hidden inside a kitchen garbage can. The discovery came in pieces. Newsom's burned body was found on January 7th. Christian's abandoned vehicle led police to Chipman Street. When officers entered on January 9th, the house was empty except for the trash can containing Christian's remains. Forensics recovered fingerprints, DNA, and physical evidence tying the group to the crime. Davidson fled but left behind incriminating items. Newsom's shoes and Christian's belongings surfaced in his girlfriend's possession. His story shifted constantly, but the physical evidence locked him in. A 2007 grand jury indicted all 5 individuals. Davidson faced 46 charges. His October 2009 trial laid out his role as ringleader. Co-defendant statements and forensic evidence erased any doubt. On October 28th, jurors convicted him on every count. During sentencing, they unanimously chose the death penalty for 4 capital murder charges. In 2010, he received an additional 80 years, all consecutive. Appeals dragged on for years. Claims of prejudice, procedural errors, and constitutional arguments were raised and rejected. In 2015, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld all convictions. In 2016, the Tennessee Supreme Court did the same. As of 2025, Davidson remains on death row at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. No execution date is set. For the families, the process has never truly ended. Each hearing forces them to relive what happened. Gary Christian has spoken openly about the toll, saying the endless delays feel like justice denied. The case even influenced state legislation. In 2014, Tennessee passed the Chris Newsom and Channon Christian Acts, strengthening protections for victims during lengthy trials. The Chipman Street house was demolished in 2008, but the memory hasn't faded. Scholarships in the victims' names and annual remembrances keep their stories alive. Davidson's name, meanwhile, is permanently tied to one of Tennessee's darkest crimes. What makes this case so haunting is the pure randomness. Christian and Newsom didn't know their attackers. There was no feud, no prior contact, just 2 young people who crossed paths with a group willing to inflict unimaginable cruelty. Davidson will likely never be executed due to the slow appeals process, but he will never walk free again. And while the state was still processing the brutality of this case, another shocking Tennessee crime was already unfolding, this time in a courthouse parking lot in broad daylight. Case 2. Jennifer Hyatt. Love can inspire extraordinary acts of devotion, but sometimes that devotion crosses into deadly territory. On an August morning in 2005, a routine prisoner transport at the Roane County Courthouse in Kingston turned into chaos. At the center was Jennifer Forsyth Hyatt, 31, a licensed practical nurse whose obsession with an inmate would leave one officer dead and send her to prison for life. Jennifer had no criminal history. She worked inside Tennessee's prison system, where she met inmate George Hyatt, a career criminal with a long record of robberies, assaults, and multiple escapes dating back to 1990. Despite knowing exactly who he was, she became romantically involved. She was fired in 2004 for smuggling him food, but instead of cutting ties, she doubled down. She got permission from the warden and married him in May 2005. George was notorious for escaping custody. When he appeared in court on August 9, 2005, he was already serving 35 years and had just pled guilty to a new robbery charge, adding 6 more years. As officers Wayne Cotton, Morgan, and Larry Porky Harris escorted him in full restraints across the courthouse parking lot, George glanced at Jennifer sitting in the front row. Moments later, their escape plan began. Jennifer pulled up in a blue Ford Explorer, stepped out with a 9mm pistol bought at a pawn shop, and opened fire. Officer Morgan, a 56-year-old veteran close to retirement, was hit 3 times in the abdomen. Harris returned fire until he ran out of ammunition, then fired Morgan's weapon. Jennifer was grazed in the leg, but she and George fled, leaving Morgan dying on the ground. He was airlifted to UT Medical Center and pronounced dead at 10:57 that morning. The escape sparked a multi-state manhunt. Schools locked down, perimeters were set, and alerts went out across Tennessee, Kentucky, and Ohio. The couple ditched the Explorer, stole a van, and headed north. Jennifer's blood from her leg wound created a trail investigators quickly followed. In Kentucky and Ohio, they stayed at motels, leaving behind surveillance footage and physical evidence. Their break came from a cab driver, Mike Wagers. He picked them up outside Cincinnati, recognized them from the news, and drove them to Columbus while quietly alerting police. On August 10th, about 36 hours after the shooting, a SWAT team surrounded their room at an America's Best Value Inn. Both surrendered without a fight. Inside, officers recovered weapons and a 34-page diary Jennifer had written, titled A Modern-Day Bonnie and Clyde, laying out their plan and intended route to Pennsylvania. Extradition wasn't immediate. Both initially refused to waive it, forcing Tennessee to use formal legal procedures. During this time, Jennifer's father, Utah police veteran Floyd Forsyth, revealed that weeks before the shooting, he had warned authorities. Jennifer had asked him if he had any spare handcuff keys, claiming she wanted to handcuff George to the bed when he got out. He suspected she was preparing to aid an escape. His concerns proved justified. On September 17, 2007, Jennifer stood before Judge E. Eugene Eblin and pled guilty to first-degree murder for killing Officer Morgan and attempted first-degree murder for shooting Officer Harris. She received life without parole, plus 15 consecutive years. The police spared her from the death penalty and required her to testify against George if needed. It wasn't. On March 9, 2009, George Hyatt pled guilty to all charges and also received life without parole. Officer Morgan left behind a devastated family and a law enforcement community that viewed his death as a senseless betrayal. With 28 years of service, he had escorted some of Tennessee's most dangerous offenders without incident, until a corrections nurse decided her husband's freedom mattered more than his life. Officer Harris survived, but carried lifelong trauma from watching his partner die. Jennifer Hyatt is now housed at the Deborah K. Johnson Rehabilitation Center in Nashville. George is at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. Their life together ended the moment they were arrested, and they will die in separate prisons. The case became a major warning for the correction system. Policies on staff-inmate relationships, boundary violations, and security protocols were reevaluated statewide. Jennifer's descent from nurse to killer remains one of Tennessee's most shocking examples of how personal obsession can override reason. And while her deadly devotion ended one officer's life, Tennessee would soon face another predator, this one targeting victims along the state's highways, turning truck stops into crime scenes. Case 3. Bruce Mendenhall. The open road has always represented freedom in American culture, but for some, it becomes a hunting ground. In the summer of 2007, a long-haul truck driver from Illinois was exposed as one of Tennessee's most disturbing suspected serial killers. Bruce Delane Mendenhall, born April 14, 1951, lived an unremarkable life in Albion, Illinois. He was married, had 3 children, and spent decades driving trucks across the country. Neighbors described him as irritable and odd, but not violent. He once ran for mayor after the city forced him to clean up abandoned cars. He received only 49 votes. Outwardly, he was just another trucker. Behind the wheel, he was allegedly something far darker. On June 6, 2007, the body of 48-year-old Samantha Winters was found in a trash bin at a Pilot truck stop in Lebanon, Tennessee. She had been shot. 20 days later, on June 26th, police discovered 25-year-old Sarah Nicole Hulbert's body near I-24 outside Nashville, also shot. At first, the cases weren't officially linked, but investigators noticed similar conditions, locations, and victim profiles. Then, on July 11, 2007, 31-year-old Indianapolis mother of 2 Karma Purpura disappeared from a Flying J truck stop after being seen talking to a truck driver. Her body wouldn't be found until 2011, down a steep embankment in Kentucky with a gunshot wound to the head. The next day, July 12, 2007, Detective Sergeant Pat Postiglione was conducting surveillance at a TA truck stop for the Hulbert case. He spotted a truck matching surveillance images from the night Hulbert was killed. He approached and saw dried blood inside the cab. The driver was Bruce Mendenhall. Postiglione asked to search the truck. Shockingly, Mendenhall agreed. What police found inside escalated the case immediately. A .22 caliber rifle, bloody clothing, and identification belonging to missing woman Karma Purpura. Blood in the cab later matched Winters, Hulbert, Purpura, and others. Investigators described the truck as a mobile crime scene. Note, some online claims mention evidence linked to the Christian Newsom case. These claims are incorrect. Mendenhall had no involvement in that case. Mendenhall was arrested on the spot and charged with Hulbert's murder. During questioning, he implicated himself, then later tried to retract the statements. The case quickly expanded. Blood found in the truck also matched Letitia Milliken, a missing woman from Millersville, Tennessee, who vanished in February 2007. Multiple law enforcement agencies across the country began reviewing unsolved homicides involving truck stops and isolated interstates. The legal timeline stretched for years. In 2010, Mendenhall was convicted of first-degree murder for killing Sarah Hulbert and received life in prison. In 2017, he was indicted in Wilson County for murdering Samantha Winters. He was convicted in 2018 and given a second life sentence. The Purpura case took far longer due to multi-state complications. She disappeared in Indiana, her remains were found in Kentucky, and key evidence was discovered in Tennessee. Courts ultimately ruled Tennessee's evidence made Indiana the correct venue because Mendenhall's truck constituted the crime scene. After years of delays, in January 2025, an Indiana jury convicted him of Purpura's murder after less than 90 minutes of deliberation. In March 2025, he received an additional 65 years. Across all sentences, Mendenhall now faces 261 years in prison. He remains a suspect in unsolved cases in Georgia, Illinois, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas, and Alabama. Some investigations have ruled him out through DNA. Others remain open. Authorities have even examined potential ties to older interstate killings, including the 1992 murder of college student Tammy Zawicki, though no charges have been filed. What makes Mendenhall's case so chilling is the nature of his mobility. A trucker can cross multiple states in a single day. Victims near truck stops, especially those engaged in survival-based activities, often have delayed missing person reports, giving offenders an advantage. Mendenhall exploited those vulnerabilities. His truck contained evidence from women in multiple jurisdictions, each hundreds of miles apart. Detective Postiglione, whose instincts cracked the case, later testified about the moment he spotted blood on the truck door and opened Mendenhall's evidence-filled bag. That single search likely stopped future victims and helped bring long-delayed justice to families who had waited years. Now in his 70s, Mendenhall is incarcerated in Tennessee, with additional transfers expected as other states continue to investigate. He will die behind bars. For the families of Winters, Hulbert, and Purpura, the convictions brought closure but not relief. Their cases reshaped how agencies share information across state lines and highlighted how easily mobile predators evade early detection. As Mendenhall's reign along America's highways was ending, another tragedy was unfolding in Murfreesboro, this time inside a college apartment, where a dispute between roommates would turn deadly over something as simple as a phone call. Case 4, Shantarika Madden. Sometimes the most dangerous conflicts aren't with strangers. They're with the people we live beside every day. In March 2011, two Middle Tennessee State University students who grew up in the same Memphis neighborhood, attended the same high school, and were both first-generation college students, found themselves in a roommate situation that deteriorated past the point of repair. Their clashes over lifestyle, noise, guests, and drug use eventually exploded into deadly violence. Clantina Tina Stewart, 21, was a junior guard on the Lady Raiders basketball team, well-liked on campus, and weeks away from the Sun Belt Conference tournament. Her boyfriend, Casey Anunu, played for the men's team. Stewart kept a structured schedule built around basketball and academics. Her roommate, 18-year-old freshman Shantarika Madden, was a political science major and honors student who dreamed of a legal career. She was quieter, preferred studying, and clashed with Stewart's more social lifestyle. Problems began immediately after Madden moved into their Raiders Crossing apartment in August 2010. Stewart said Madden smoked marijuana inside, risking her athletic scholarship. Madden complained that Stewart's boyfriend practically lived in the apartment, and that Stewart's music and parties made it impossible to study. Both repeatedly complained to management, but nothing changed. On March 2nd, 2011, the conflict finally boiled over. Madden returned with her friend Renee Reese and smoked marijuana, thinking Stewart wasn't home. But Stewart was there and furious. She had warned Madden countless times that drug use could destroy her career. Stewart called the courtesy officer, an off-duty police officer, to report the marijuana. She tweeted in anger while waiting, openly venting about her roommate. Police arrived, issued Madden a warning, and left. What happened next depends on whose account you believe. Madden testified that she tried to talk things out, but an argument escalated into a physical fight. She claimed Stewart shoved her and that she grabbed a knife from Stewart's bed in fear while Stewart was on top of her. What isn't disputed, Stewart ended up with multiple stab wounds, one fatal to the chest. Around 7 p.m., Casey Anunu found Stewart in her bedroom, bleeding heavily. She was rushed to Middle Tennessee Medical Center, but died soon after. She was just 21. Madden's actions after the stabbing damaged her credibility. She didn't call for help. Instead, she phoned her friend, then her mother. She washed the knife, bundled it with another knife, and threw both in a dumpster. She also sent misleading texts from Stewart's phone so no one would return to the apartment. On July 5, 2011, a grand jury indicted Madden for first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. Her May 2012 trial drew major media attention. The defense argued self-defense, pointing to the size difference. Madden was 4'11". Stewart was 5'7" and athletic. Madden testified that she feared for her life. Prosecutors countered with evidence that didn't match a panicked defensive action. Stewart had several stab wounds, not one accidental strike. Madden never called 911. The knife disposal and text messages showed planning after the fact, not fear. Assistant District Attorney Paul Newman bluntly told jurors Madden was lying. After about 2 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted Madden of second-degree murder and tampering with evidence on May 14, 2012. At sentencing, Madden expressed remorse through a written statement, but Judge Don Ash said he didn't believe her. He sentenced her to 25 years for murder plus 4 years for evidence tampering, served consecutively. 29 years total. The MTSU community was devastated. Stewart's team had to play their conference tournament days after her death and struggled emotionally. They later reached the NCAA tournament but were eliminated early. Madden filed multiple appeals, arguing judicial bias, excessive sentencing, and ineffective counsel. All were rejected. As of 2024, she remains incarcerated at West Tennessee State Penitentiary. Her projected release is October 2034. Tina Stewart's killing remains one of the most shocking campus crimes in Tennessee. A roommate conflict that spiraled into tragedy. While this case involved a personal dispute that turned deadly, Tennessee was about to face a completely different kind of threat. A self-styled Michael Myers prowling the streets of Memphis. Case 5. Joshua Dotson. Some criminals embrace their crimes so openly that even the courtroom becomes theater for their twisted confessions. In August 2024, a Memphis courtroom watched in disbelief as a defendant took the witness stand. Not to proclaim innocence, but to compare himself to a fictional horror villain and admit to being what he called a serial killer. Joshua Dotson didn't just face justice for one crime. He stood trial for a spree of violence that terrorized Memphis between 2019 and 2020, leaving 5 people deceased and families shattered. His own testimony would seal his fate and earn him one of the longest sentences in recent Tennessee history. Joshua Dotson's path to infamy began long before his crimes made headlines. Born and raised in Memphis, he lived a relatively unremarkable existence until circumstances and choices led him toward escalating violence. By 2019, Dotson had begun a pattern of behavior that would ultimately define him as one of Tennessee's most brazen killers. What set him apart wasn't just the brutality of his actions. It was his willingness to own them publicly, to wear them almost as a badge of identity. The confirmed trail of violence began on November 17, 2019, when Divian Parker was fatally shot in a market parking lot in Memphis. Witnesses reported seeing a confrontation escalate rapidly before gunfire erupted. Parker, who had no apparent connection to his assailant, became the first known victim in what would become a string of attacks. Months passed before the next documented incident. On May 24, 2020, near Jesse Turner Park in South Memphis, 2 more lives were taken. Renita Bennett and Reginald Anderson were both shot and left at the scene. The randomness of the attacks alarmed investigators. There seemed to be no clear motive beyond opportunity and malice. Then came June 12, 2020, the crime that would ultimately lead to Dotson's capture. That evening, Dotson arrived at the home of his former girlfriend, 19-year-old Jamisha Kovson. She was several months pregnant, a detail that would later make the case even more heartbreaking. According to police reports and court testimony, Dotson and Kovson argued about social media posts and her pregnancy. At one point, Kovson retreated to a room and closed the door. Dotson responded by firing a bullet through it. When that initial shot missed, he forced his way into the room, argued further, then left temporarily, only to return and fire multiple rounds through the closed door again. When officers arrived hours later after receiving reports of shots fired, they found Kovson inside the residence on Quinn Avenue with multiple wounds. She was transported to the hospital but did not survive, nor did her unborn child. In Tennessee law, the destruction of a viable fetus during a violent crime constitutes a separate count of murder. Dotson would ultimately face charges for 2 lives taken that night. 6 days after Kovson's slaying, on June 18, 2020, Dotson was added to Tennessee's most wanted list. U.S. Marshals tracked him to Nashville, where he was apprehended without incident. The arrest marked the beginning of a lengthy legal process that would culminate in one of the most unusual trials Memphis had witnessed in years. Prosecutors built their case methodically. They had forensic evidence linking Dotson to the Quinn Avenue residence, witness testimony about his tumultuous relationship with Kovson, and phone records placing him at the scene. What they didn't expect was that Dotson himself would become their most valuable asset. During his trial in August 2024, Dotson took the stand in his own defense, a risky move that defense attorneys often advise against. But what happened next shocked even seasoned courtroom observers. Rather than deny the charges or express remorse, Dotson embraced them. He told the jury directly, "I am Michael Myers," referencing the fictional slasher from the Halloween horror franchise. He didn't stop there. Dotson openly admitted to being a serial killer and claimed responsibility not just for Kovson's demise, but for the earlier incidents involving Parker, Bennett, and Anderson. He stated that he believed Kovson had informed police about his previous actions, which motivated him to silence her permanently. Prosecutors were stunned. Defense attorneys appeared helpless. The confession was complete, unprompted, and delivered with a disturbing lack of remorse. After less than an hour of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts related to Kovson's case. 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for Kovson, 1 for her unborn child. On October 31st, 2024, Halloween, fittingly, Judge Carolyn Addison sentenced Dotson to 51 years for each conviction to be served consecutively. That totaled 102 years, but the legal system wasn't finished with Joshua Dotson. His courtroom confessions to the other slayings couldn't be ignored. Prosecutors in Shelby County pursued charges for the incidents involving Parker, Bennett, and Anderson. Rather than face another lengthy trial where his own words would again condemn him, Dotson accepted a plea agreement in February 2025. On Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2025, he pleaded guilty to 3 additional counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of reckless endangerment with a deadly weapon. Judge Addison handed down 159 more years, bringing Dotson's total sentence to 261 years in prison. The sentences were structured consecutively, ensuring he would never see freedom again. Lead prosecutor Regina Lucreziano addressed the outcome with measured satisfaction. After 5 years, we are pleased to finally have justice for Dotson's multiple victims. While no amount of time in prison will bring the victims back to their loved ones, we are content that he will never be a threat to our community again. For the families of Dotson's victims, the resolution brought a mixture of relief and anguish. Kovson's relatives mourned not only her loss, but the future her unborn child would never experience. Parker's family struggled to understand why their loved one had been targeted in a parking lot for no apparent reason. Bennett's and Anderson's families grieved together, their lives intersecting through shared tragedy. Joshua Dotson remains incarcerated in Tennessee, serving what amounts to multiple lifetimes behind bars. At 40 years old, he will almost certainly expire in custody. His case became a grim example of how some individuals not only commit heinous acts, but also revel in them, turning courtrooms into stages for their own dark performances. What makes Dotson's story particularly chilling isn't just the body count or the brutality. It's the absence of any recognizable motive beyond violence itself. He didn't know most of his victims. There was no financial gain, no revenge plot that made sense. Just a man who, by his own admission, became a predator and wore that identity openly. But while Dotson's case shocked Memphis with its brazenness, another Tennessee case would divide opinion entirely, involving a young woman, a deceased mother, and a conviction that wouldn't survive scrutiny. Case 6. Nora Jackson. Not every conviction tells the whole story, and sometimes the justice system gets it wrong. On June 5th, 2005, 18-year-old Nora Jackson made a frantic call after finding her mother, 39-year-old Jennifer Jackson, stabbed more than 50 times inside their East Memphis home. What began as a horrific family tragedy soon turned into a highly controversial investigation that would later expose major failures by prosecutors and lead to a rare, overturned conviction. Jennifer Jackson was a successful investment banker and a devoted single mother. But her relationship with Nora had become strained. Jennifer worried about Nora's late nights, drinking, and slipping grades. Friends testified she had even considered sending Nora to boarding school. Nora, meanwhile, was still coping with the unsolved 2004 shooting death of her father, Nazmi Hassanieh. Police found no connection between the two murders, but the timeline added emotional weight to the investigation. On June 4th, the night before the murder, Nora went out with friends. Parties, alcohol, marijuana, and festival visit. Surveillance footage showed her buying bandages at Walgreens around 4:04 a.m. with a fresh cut on her hand. She claimed she cut herself on a broken beer bottle earlier, but prosecutors argued the injury was newer and suspicious. Around 5 a.m., she returned home and found her mother's body. She ran to a neighbor's house for help, then called 911. Jennifer had been stabbed dozens of times in a violent attack. The scene showed signs of a struggle, yet Nora had no defensive wounds and her manicure was intact. Investigators found no physical evidence tying Nora to the murder, no DNA, no fingerprints, and the murder weapon was never found. At least 2 unknown DNA profiles were recovered from the bedroom, but investigators did not pursue those leads aggressively. Instead, they focused on inconsistencies in Nora's timeline and the strained mother-daughter relationship. Phone records showed an unusual 2-hour gap in Nora's normally constant phone activity between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., the likely window of the attack. Friends testified she had complained about her mother that night, and one recalled her angrily saying, "My mom's a witch, and she needs to go to hell." Another friend, Andrew Hammock, testified about receiving late-night calls that prosecutors used to imply Nora returned home earlier than she claimed. Despite no physical evidence, prosecutors built a circumstantial case: a rebellious teenager, resentment toward her mother, a suspicious hand injury, and a gap in phone activity. On September 29, 2005, almost 4 months after the murder, Nora was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. She couldn't pay the $500,000 bond and spent more than 3 years in jail awaiting trial. In February 2009, her trial finally began. Defense attorney Valerie Corder argued the evidence was entirely speculative. No murder weapon, no forensic ties, and the intact nails made a prolonged knife struggle highly unlikely. But prosecutors pushed a strong emotional narrative. During closing arguments, Assistant DA Amy Weirich crossed a constitutional line by telling the jury, "Just tell us where you were," improperly implying Nora should have testified. On February 21, 2009, Nora was convicted of second-degree murder. In March, she received a sentence of 20 years and 9 months. But Corder kept digging. She uncovered that prosecutors had withheld a written statement from Hammack, one that directly contradicted his courtroom testimony and admitted he had been heavily intoxicated and didn't have his phone the night of the murder. This was classic Brady material, evidence the defense had a constitutional right to receive. On August 22, 2014, the Tennessee Supreme Court overturned Nora's conviction, citing 2 major violations: Weirich's unconstitutional comments on Nora's silence, the prosecution's failure to disclose Hammack's contradictory statement. A new trial was ordered. Facing the risk of another conviction despite the flawed original case, Nora entered an Alford plea to voluntary manslaughter on May 20, 2015, maintaining her innocence while acknowledging the state might prove a case at retrial. She received a 15-year sentence. On August 7, 2016, after serving more than a decade, Nora Jackson walked free at age 29. She moved in with a family friend, later attended SUNY Empire State College, and became involved with the Innocence Project. She has repeatedly pushed Tennessee authorities to test and identify the unknown DNA found at the crime scene, evidence that was never fully explained. Her case remains one of Memphis's most debated. Some officials, including the original judge and prosecutor, still insist she was guilty. Others see it as a textbook example of tunnel vision and prosecutorial misconduct, where investigators locked onto a suspect early and ignored evidence that didn't fit. Nora later faced unrelated legal trouble in 2022 with a substance possession arrest in Kentucky, but it had no connection to her original case. Jennifer Jackson's real killer has never been identified, and the Nora Jackson case stands as a reminder of the dangers of building convictions on circumstantial evidence, incomplete investigations, and withheld information. But while Nora's story centered on uncertainty, Tennessee's next case left none. When a disturbed young man walked into a Nashville restaurant wearing nothing but a jacket and carrying an AR-15. Case 7. Travis Reinking. Mass shootings leave scars that never fully heal, but they also reveal extraordinary courage in the face of unimaginable terror. At 3:20 a.m. on April 22, 2018, customers inside an Antioch Waffle House were finishing late-night meals when a gunman walked in wearing nothing but a green jacket and carrying an AR-15 style rifle. The shooter was 29-year-old Travis Reinking. Within minutes, 4 people were killed, several others were wounded, and Nashville was thrust into one of the most shocking attacks in its history. What stopped the shooter was not police. It was a bystander, James Shaw Jr., whose quick actions prevented further loss of life. Travis Reinking grew up in Morton, Illinois, working for his father's crane business. But for years, he struggled with severe mental illness. Deputies in Tazewell County responded several times to his family's home due to delusional behavior. In 2016, he insisted that Taylor Swift was stalking him and hacking into his accounts. Paramedic reports noted paranoia, hostility toward law enforcement, and access to firearms. Despite these red flags, Reinking kept his guns. In July 2017, he moved to Washington, D.C., where his delusions escalated. On July 7th, he tried to breach a restricted White House security barrier, demanding to meet President Donald Trump and claiming sovereign citizen status. After this incident, Illinois authorities revoked his firearm authorization and confiscated 4 guns, including the AR-15, later used in the shooting. Here is where the system failed. Instead of permanently removing the weapons, they were released to his father, Jeffrey Reinking, under the condition he keep them away from Travis. Jeffrey later returned the guns to his son. That decision would prove deadly. In late 2017, Travis moved to Nashville and worked as a crane operator. His mental condition continued deteriorating. He experienced delusions that coworkers were plotting against him. On April 3, 2018, he was fired after claiming people were following him. Days later, he stole a BMW from a dealer, later writing in a journal about punishing people by taking something they couldn't take back. At 3:20 a.m. on April 22nd, he drove to the Waffle House on Murfreesboro Pike. In the parking lot, he fatally shot two men, 20-year-old Joe Perez and 29-year-old Torian Sanderlin, a restaurant employee. Inside, he continued firing, fatally wounding 23-year-old Aquila da Silva and 21-year-old Diebony Groves. 4 more people were injured. The attack ended only because of the bravery of one customer. When Reinking paused to reload or clear a malfunction, James Shaw Jr. rushed him, grabbed the overheated barrel, wrestled the rifle away, and threw it behind the counter. Shaw then helped others out of the building and called for help. Reinking fled into nearby woods, triggering a citywide manhunt. Schools and businesses locked down, and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation placed him on its most wanted list. After 34 hours hiding in the area, he was spotted by a construction worker. Police arrested him carrying a backpack containing a loaded handgun and ammunition. Legal proceedings focused almost entirely on Reinking's mental state. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and required treatment before he was deemed competent to stand trial. COVID-19 delays pushed the trial to 2022. The question wasn't whether he committed the shooting. Surveillance footage made that clear. The issue was whether he understood the wrongfulness of his actions. Defense experts testified that Reinking believed Waffle House patrons were CIA agents and that he was following what he perceived as divine instructions. Prosecutors countered with evidence of planning: the escape bag filled with weapons and silver bars, the journal entries about punishing people, and his decision to flee, shower, change clothes, and avoid police after the attack. On February 4, 2022, the jury rejected the insanity defense and found Reinking guilty on all 16 counts, including 4 counts of first-degree murder and multiple attempted murder charges. On February 5th, he was sentenced to life without parole. Additional weapons convictions added 114 years, ensuring he will never be released. The shooting prompted national conversations about firearm access for individuals with documented mental illness, oversight, failures in weapons returns, and the responsibilities of family members who take custody of guns on behalf of prohibited persons. Jeffrey Reinking faced heavy public scrutiny for giving his son the rifles back, though he was not criminally charged. For the victims' families, the trial brought accountability, but not healing. Loved ones of Perez, Sanderlin, Da Silva, and Groves shared the devastating impact of their loss during sentencing. Their legacies are honored through memorial events, scholarships, and community outreach programs. James Shaw Jr. was widely recognized for his role in stopping the attack, though he consistently stated he acted out of instinct rather than heroism. His actions undeniably saved lives. The Waffle House shooting remains one of Nashville's most significant acts of mass violence, an event shaped by untreated mental illness, a series of preventable systemic failures, and the courage of an ordinary citizen who stepped in when every second counted. And while Reinking's case raised difficult questions about mental health and responsibility, Tennessee's next story involved a very different motive: when a pastor's secret relationship spiraled into deadly consequence. Case 8, Latoshia Daniels. When trust is betrayed by those who preach faith, the consequences can spiral into tragedy. In April 2019, a Memphis area pastor and his wife opened their door to an unexpected visitor, a woman they knew from their former church in Little Rock, Arkansas. What began as an awkward conversation would end in gunfire, leaving one person deceased, another wounded, and revealing a hidden relationship that had festered in secrecy for years. Latoshia Daniels, a licensed social worker and anger management specialist, would stand trial for actions that contradicted everything her professional credentials represented. Her case became a stark example of how passion, manipulation, and heartbreak can drive even the most educated individuals toward irreversible violence. Latoshia Daniels appeared to have her life together. At 46 years old, she owned the Root Behavioral Health in Arkansas, specializing in anger management counseling. She was educated, articulate, and respected in her community. But beneath that professional veneer, Daniels was navigating personal turmoil. Her second marriage was emotionally distant, leaving her feeling neglected and unfulfilled. Seeking guidance, she reached out to someone she trusted through her church connections, Pastor Broads Perry. Broads Perry was 36 years old, married to Tabitha Archie, and serving as executive pastor at Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church in Memphis. Before that appointment, he had worked at St. Mark's Baptist Church in Little Rock, where he specialized in assimilation and small group ministries. That's where he first encountered Daniels, who was a member and life group leader, going through her divorce. According to Daniels' later testimony, she approached Perry for marriage counseling around February 2017, hoping to save her failing relationship. What happened during those counseling sessions would become a matter of dispute. Daniels testified that during their second meeting, Perry pulled her chair close to him, kissed her, and initiated physical intimacy. She claimed he gave her everything she had been missing for a long time. From there, according to her account, a relationship developed that lasted nearly 2 years. Daniels described it as controlling and manipulative. She said Perry demanded she address him as "yes, sir," and "no, sir," that he wouldn't allow her to wear clothes in hotel rooms during their encounters, and that he withdrew affection when she failed to comply with his wishes. She testified that their communications occurred primarily through an app that automatically deleted messages, a detail that made it difficult to verify her claims later. Perry allegedly discussed the concept of ethical non-monogamy with Daniels, even suggesting she find another person to join their relationship. Daniels testified that Perry claimed his wife knew about and approved of an open marriage arrangement, though Tabitha would later tell investigators she had no knowledge of any affair. Throughout the relationship, Daniels said she paid for travel expenses, while Perry financed other aspects of their time together. She claimed to love him deeply, believing they had a future together despite his marital status. In October 2018, Perry accepted the executive pastor position at Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church and relocated to Collierville, Tennessee, a suburb east of Memphis. The distance strained the relationship. According to Daniels, Perry began pulling away, eventually deciding he wanted to end things entirely. For Daniels, this rejection was devastating. She later testified that she became suicidal, unable to process the loss of someone she had invested so much emotion and hope into. On April 4th, 2019, Daniels drove from Little Rock to Collierville, a journey of approximately 2.5 to 3 hours. Before leaving Arkansas, she stopped at Fort Thompson Sporting Goods in Sherwood and purchased a Ruger 9mm handgun, along with ammunition. She later claimed she bought the weapon to end her own life, not to harm anyone else. Prosecutors would argue the timeline and circumstances told a different story. Daniels arrived at the Perry's apartment at Meridian Place in Collierville around 9 or 10 that evening. Tabitha Archie answered the door. Daniels claimed she was in town for a conference, a statement that immediately raised suspicion given the late hour and lack of advance notice. Nevertheless, Tabitha, who knew Daniels from church activities, tennis, and dance classes in Little Rock, allowed her inside. The two women chatted while waiting for Broads to arrive home. When Perry walked through the door approximately 10 minutes later, his demeanor shifted. Tabitha testified that he appeared agitated and said, "This isn't a surprise. This is an unexpected guest." He began questioning Daniels about why she was there. The conversation grew tense. After about 40 minutes, it became clear Daniels needed to leave. The three stood to walk toward the door. Tabitha led the way, walking out onto the second-floor landing near the staircase. When she turned back, she realized no one was behind her. Then she saw Daniels pull a gun from her jacket. "You broke my heart," Daniels reportedly said, and began firing. Broads Perry was struck multiple times in the head and torso. He collapsed in the doorway. When Tabitha rushed back to help her husband, Daniels allegedly told her to get out of the way before shooting her in the left shoulder. Daniels then reloaded the weapon, a detail that prosecutors emphasized as evidence of intent and control. Perry was transported to the hospital, but did not survive. Tabitha's injuries, while serious, were not fatal. Police arrived quickly and took Daniels into custody without incident. The weapon was recovered, still loaded with 5 rounds. Daniels was charged with first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and employing a firearm during the commission of a felony. She spent the next 4 years in jail awaiting trial, during which time she reportedly wrote 2 books, one aimed at helping incarcerated mothers, the other addressing her experiences. Her trial finally began in November 2024. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Kevin McAlpin, argued that Daniels had planned the attack. They pointed to the timeline, purchasing a gun hours before the shooting, driving several hours across state lines, arriving unannounced late at night. Prosecutor Iris Williams emphasized Daniels' own words during closing arguments. "He broke up with me. I wanted him to feel the pain I've felt." Williams reminded jurors that Daniels shot Tabitha and then reloaded, demonstrating deliberation even in the midst of violence. "If a broken heart was a defense to murder," Williams told the jury, "I wouldn't have a job." The defense, led by attorney Lauren Fuchs, presented a different narrative. They didn't deny Daniels' involvement, but argued she was not guilty of premeditated murder. Instead, they sought a voluntary manslaughter conviction, claiming Daniels acted in the heat of passion, while emotionally distressed and unable to reason properly. Fuchs painted Perry as manipulative and controlling, describing a relationship built on power, imbalances, and deceit. "He got to have this lifestyle where he was cheating on multiple women, and it was okay," Fuchs argued. "Latoshia gave him whatever he wanted. He took and took and took from these women, and the whole time, he was lying to all of them." Daniels herself took the stand. She testified that she loved Perry and never intended to harm him. She claimed she didn't remember the actual moment of pulling the trigger, describing herself as not in her normal, healthy state that day. When asked directly if she denied shooting Perry and Tabitha, Daniels responded that she didn't deny it, but couldn't recall firing the weapon. On November 8, 2024, after approximately 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Daniels was found guilty of second-degree murder for Perry's death and reckless endangerment for shooting Tabitha. She was acquitted of the firearm felony charge. The jury's decision to convict on second-degree rather than first-degree murder indicated they did not find sufficient evidence of premeditation, the key distinction between the 2 charges. Daniels showed no visible reaction as the verdict was read. Her bond was immediately revoked, and she was taken into custody. Sentencing was scheduled for December 17, 2025. Second-degree murder in Tennessee carries a sentence of 15 to 60 years, while reckless endangerment adds an additional 2 to 4 years. Given the circumstances and victim impact, legal observers anticipated Daniels would receive a substantial sentence within that range. For Tabitha Archie, the verdict brought mixed emotions. She had lost her husband and sustained physical injuries that left lasting effects. During the trial, she testified about the trauma of that night, seeing the gun, hearing the shots, watching Broads collapse. The psychological scars remained deep. Prosecutors noted that Tabitha had cooperated fully with the investigation and prosecution, reliving painful memories to ensure accountability. The case sparked conversations about pastoral misconduct, power dynamics in counseling relationships, and whether emotional distress can ever mitigate violent actions. Some sympathized with Daniels, viewing her as a woman betrayed by someone in a position of spiritual authority. Others saw her as someone who made deliberate choices, purchasing a weapon, traveling across state lines, and ultimately taking a life. Defense attorney Fuchs stated that Daniels expressed genuine remorse, particularly regarding Tabitha, and hoped to make amends. Latoshia has been genuinely remorseful in all our conversations with her, Fuchs told media outlets. Not just as to Tabitha, but to Broads. This is a weight she carries every day. As Daniels awaits formal sentencing in December 2025, her fate remains partially uncertain, somewhere between 15 and 60 years. But what is certain is that a moment of rage, fueled by heartbreak and rejection, destroyed multiple lives. Broads Perry lost his future, Tabitha Archie lost her husband and her sense of safety, and Latoshia Daniels lost her freedom and professional legacy. The tragedy serves as a reminder that titles, credentials, and professional expertise offer no immunity from human emotion at its most destructive. And while one broken heart led to violence in Collierville, another predator in Memphis was about to shatter a family's world during what should have been an ordinary morning jog. Case 9. Cleotha Abston. Some crimes are so random, so senseless, that they shatter entire communities' sense of security. On the morning of September 2nd, 2022, Eliza Fletcher set out for her regular pre-dawn run near the University of Memphis. The 34-year-old kindergarten teacher and mother of two had no reason to expect danger. She had run this route countless times before. But within minutes, surveillance cameras would capture her being forcibly abducted by a stranger in a violent struggle that sent shockwaves through Memphis and beyond. The massive search that followed gripped the nation, ending in heartbreak when her body was discovered days later. The man responsible, Cleotha Abston, wasn't just a random attacker. He was a career criminal whose history of violence should have kept him off the streets permanently. Cleotha Abston, who sometimes used the surname Henderson, had been on law enforcement's radar for decades. His criminal history began in the 1990s when he was still a juvenile. But his most significant conviction came in 2000, when at 16 years old, he kidnapped a prominent Memphis attorney at gunpoint, forcing the victim into a vehicle and holding him for hours. That conviction earned Abston 20 years in prison, time he served before being released back into the community. What authorities didn't know during his incarceration was that Abston would continue his pattern of violence almost immediately upon release. In September 2021, less than a year before Fletcher's abduction, Abston encountered a woman named Alicia Franklin through the dating app Plenty of Fish. Franklin later testified that while they had discussed meeting for dinner, she had no intention of engaging in any activity beyond that. When she arrived at Abston's Hickory Hill apartment, she claimed he put a gun to her neck, forced her into his vehicle, and assaulted her. Franklin took immediate action, calling a friend who was a police officer and going to Regional 1 Medical Center for examination and evidence collection. A kit was processed, but then it sat. Due to massive backlogs in Tennessee's crime lab system, Franklin's kit wasn't tested for months. By the time DNA results confirmed Abstin's involvement, he had already committed another, far more visible crime. September 6, 2022 began like any other day for Eliza Fletcher. She woke before dawn, laced up her running shoes, and headed out around 4 a.m. for her regular route near the University of Memphis campus. She wore her typical athletic gear, earbuds likely in place, focused on her workout. She had no way of knowing that Cleotha Abstin was watching. Surveillance footage later reviewed by investigators showed a black GMC Terrain circling the area multiple times before Fletcher appeared. When she jogged past, the vehicle suddenly accelerated. A man later identified as Abstin jumped out and gave chase. Fletcher ran, but Abstin caught her. Video captured a violent struggle, lasting several minutes as he forced her toward the passenger side of the vehicle. At one point, she appeared to break free briefly, but Abstin overpowered her. The SUV remained stationary for approximately 4 minutes, a detail that would haunt investigators, before driving away with Fletcher inside. When Fletcher didn't return home, her husband Richard contacted police. Her cell phone and a pair of Champion slide sandals were found in the street near where she was last seen. A witness, an early morning cyclist, had noticed the items and turned them over to authorities. Memphis police immediately recognized this as a critical missing person case and launched an extensive search operation. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage from cameras along Fletcher's route and identified the GMC Terrain. Within hours, they had tracked the vehicle to an address associated with Cleotha Abstin. On September 3rd, the day after the abduction, U.S. Marshals located Abstin and attempted to take him into custody. He tried to flee, but was quickly apprehended. The key break in the case came from forensic evidence. DNA testing on the Champion sandals found near the abduction site revealed Abstin's genetic profile. This linked him directly to the scene. Investigators also discovered cleaning supplies had been purchased shortly after the abduction, suggesting an attempt to destroy evidence. The massive search for Eliza Fletcher continued for 3 agonizing days. Volunteers, law enforcement, and community members combed through neighborhoods, wooded areas, and abandoned properties. The Fletcher family issued public pleas for information. Prayer vigils were held. Memphis collectively held its breath, hoping for a miracle. On September 5th, that hope was extinguished. Law enforcement discovered Fletcher's body behind a vacant duplex in South Memphis, within walking distance of the Longview Gardens apartments. She had sustained a fatal gunshot wound to the back of her head. An autopsy would later reveal additional injuries, including leg wounds and jaw fractures, evidence of the violence she endured before her death. Abstin was immediately charged with first-degree murder. First-degree murder in the perpetration of kidnapping, especially aggravated kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. The case became one of the most high-profile criminal prosecutions in recent Memphis history, drawing national media attention and sparking conversations about women's safety while exercising. But the legal proceedings took an unexpected turn. In April 2024, while awaiting trial for Fletcher's murder, Abstin finally faced justice for the 2021 assault on Alicia Franklin. A jury convicted him of aggravated assault, aggravated kidnapping, and possession of a weapon during commission of a felony. In May 2024, he was sentenced to 80 years in prison, 40 years for the assault, 20 for kidnapping, and 20 for the weapon charge, all consecutive. Then, on October 28, 2024, Abstin made a decision that surprised many. He pleaded guilty to all charges related to Eliza Fletcher's kidnapping and murder, He admitted to first-degree murder, especially aggravated kidnapping, and unlawful possession of a weapon. In exchange for the plea, prosecutors agreed not to pursue the death penalty. Judge Lee Coffey sentenced Abstin to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder charge, plus 40 years for kidnapping, to run concurrently. Combined with his earlier 80-year sentence for the Franklin case, Abstin will spend the rest of his life behind bars. During the hearing, Shelby County District Attorney Steve Mulroy read a statement from Fletcher's family directed at Abstin. "We have no idea what happened to you to turn you into someone so filled with a desire to hurt people. Whatever it was, it does not excuse or explain what you have done. You have changed our lives forever, and nothing will ever be the same. Your actions were evil. There is no other word for it. You murdered Liza, even though she did nothing to deserve it. She did not hurt you." The family also reflected on who Eliza was. "We miss the bright light of Liza's life every day. Liza meant so much to so many, and her smile radiated happiness, energy, and comfort. Her husband, her children, her parents, her brother, the rest of her family, her friends, her students, her school families, her fellow teachers, her church community, and so many others were moved by countless examples of her faith, kindness, and compassion. The Fletcher case exposed significant failures in Tennessee's criminal justice system. Abstin had served 20 years for kidnapping, was released, and within a year committed another violent assault, yet remained free to abduct and kill Fletcher because of evidence processing delays. The rape kit backlog became a focal point for reform advocates, who argued that faster testing could have prevented Fletcher's murder. Memphis responded with policy changes. Additional funding was allocated to crime labs to reduce backlogs. Community safety initiatives were expanded, particularly focused on early morning and late-night exercise safety. St. Mary's Episcopal School, where Fletcher taught kindergarten, established scholarships in her memory. Annual memorial runs are held on the anniversary of her abduction, drawing thousands of participants committed to honoring her memory and reclaiming public spaces. For Richard Fletcher and the couple's 2 young sons, the loss is immeasurable. Eliza was not just a wife and mother. She was an educator who poured herself into her students, a faithful community member, and someone whose kindness touched everyone she encountered. Her death represented not just a personal tragedy, but a collective wound for Memphis. Cleotha Abstin will never leave prison. At 40 years old, he will grow old and eventually die in custody. His name forever synonymous with a crime that embodied senseless, predatory violence. The Fletcher family finds small comfort knowing he can never harm anyone again, even as they navigate life without the person who meant everything to them. Eliza Fletcher's story became a rallying cry for women's safety, criminal justice reform, and the importance of processing forensic evidence promptly. Her legacy lives on, not in how she died, but in how she lived, with compassion, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to making the world better for children. And while Fletcher's case represented random violence from a career criminal, Tennessee's death row holds another killer, a woman whose crime, committed at age 18, would make her the center of one of the state's most controversial execution debates. Case 10, Krista Pike. Some crimes are so brutal, committed by individuals so young, that they force society to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, redemption, and the death penalty itself. On January 12, 1995, in a wooded area near the University of Tennessee's agricultural campus in Knoxville, 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer endured 30 minutes of unimaginable torture before her life ended. Her attackers, fellow students from the Knoxville Job Corps Center, were led by 18-year-old Krista Gale Pike, who believed Slemmer was trying to steal her boyfriend. The crime was shockingly savage. Slemmer was beaten, slashed with a box cutter, carved with satanic symbols, and ultimately killed when Pike smashed her skull with a chunk of asphalt. Afterward, Pike kept a piece of Slemmer's skull as a trophy, showing it off to classmates. Nearly 30 years later, Pike remains on death row, the only woman awaiting execution in Tennessee. In September 2026, the state plans to carry out her sentence, making her the first woman executed in Tennessee in over 200 years. Krista Gale Pike was born prematurely on March 10, 1976, in Beckley, West Virginia, to parents whose tumultuous relationship created an unstable environment. Her mother, Carissa Hansen, and father, Emil Glenn Pike, married, divorced, and remarried within a span of years, marked by infidelity, suicide attempts, and neglect. An aunt later testified that as an infant, Krista would crawl through piles of animal waste in their home, while Hansen continued partying, despite being informed her toddler was experiencing severe seizures. The childhood abuse and neglect Pike endured would later become central to her defense attorney's arguments against execution. By her teenage years, Pike had landed in Tennessee's Job Corps program, a federal career training initiative designed to help troubled youth develop skills and find employment. At the Knoxville Center, she met 17-year-old Darrell Shipp and began a relationship with him. She also became acquainted with Colleen Slemmer, a 19-year-old from Florida, who had joined the program hoping to turn her life around. According to court testimony and witness statements, Pike became convinced, without evidence, that Slemmer was interested in Shipp romantically. Friends of Slemmer consistently denied this claim, stating she had no interest in Tatterall and was focused on her own struggles, adjusting to the Job Corps environment. In fact, Slemmer had confided in her mother, May Martinez, about problems with Pike, expressing discomfort with the situation. She was unhappy at the center and wanted to leave. On the evening of January 12, 1995, Pike devised a plan. Along with Shipp and their friend Shadala Peterson, Pike convinced Slemmer to sign out of the dormitory and walk with them to a secluded area on the University of Tennessee agricultural campus. The lure was simple. They wanted to smoke marijuana together and make peace after recent tensions. Slemmer, perhaps hoping to ease the conflict, agreed. The group walked down Cumberland Avenue, passed through Tyson Park, and crossed a large field to reach a paved pathway on the Ag campus, a remote location far from witnesses or help. Once there, Pike's intentions became horrifyingly clear. She and Shipp turned on Slemmer, accusing her of trying to steal Darrell. Then the attack began. For the next 30 minutes, Slemmer was subjected to relentless brutality. Pike slashed her throat with a box cutter. She and Shipp carved a pentagram into her chest. They attempted to carve another symbol into her forehead. Court testimony revealed that Pike taunted Slemmer as she lay wounded and dying, mocking her pleas for mercy. Finally, Pike picked up a large chunk of asphalt and used it to crush Slemmer's skull, ending her life. Peterson, who served as lookout during the attack, later cooperated with prosecutors. When groundskeepers discovered Slemmer's body the next day, the scene was so horrific that the worker initially mistook it for the remains of an animal. The level of violence was almost incomprehensible. Dozens of wounds, defensive injuries, and signs of prolonged suffering. Pike made a critical mistake. She kept a piece of Slemmer's skull. Over the following days, she showed the fragment to classmates at the Job Corps Center, bragging about what she had done. The logbook at the dormitory showed that Pike, Shipp, Peterson, and Slemmer had signed out together, but only 3 returned. When detectives searched Pike's jacket, they found the skull fragment in her pocket. Pike confessed to police, but claimed they had only intended to scare Slemmer and things got out of control. A statement that strained credulity given the duration and ferocity of the attack. All 3 defendants were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Pike's trial began in early 1996. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Pike's confession, the physical evidence including the skull fragment, witness testimony about her bragging, and forensic analysis of the crime scene. On March 22, 1996, after just a few hours of deliberation, the jury found Pike guilty on both counts. 8 days later, she was sentenced to death by electrocution for the murder and 25 years for conspiracy. At 20 years old, Pike became one of the youngest women ever sentenced to death in the United States during the post-Furman era, after the Supreme Court reinstated capital punishment in 1976. Tadarrell Shipp was also convicted, but because he was 17 at the time of the crime, he avoided the death penalty. He received life in prison with the possibility of parole and will become eligible in January 2026. Shadala Peterson, who testified against Pike, received probation. Pike's case has spent nearly 3 decades winding through the appeals process. Her defense team has consistently argued that several factors should exempt her from execution. Her youth at the time of the crime, just barely 18. Her history of severe childhood abuse and neglect, and mental health diagnoses that weren't presented at trial, including bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and congenital brain damage. Krista's childhood was fraught with years of physical and sexual abuse and neglect, her attorneys stated in court filings. With time and treatment for bipolar and post-traumatic stress disorders, which were not diagnosed until years later, Krista has become a thoughtful woman with deep remorse for her crime. Her legal team also points to evolving standards in criminal justice. They argue that if Pike committed the same crime today as a barely adult teenager with documented mental illness and childhood trauma, she would almost certainly not receive a death sentence. Society's understanding of adolescent brain development, trauma's impact on behavior, and appropriate sentencing has shifted dramatically since 1996. But appeals courts have consistently upheld Pike's conviction and sentence. In 2023, her motion to reopen the case was denied. On September 30th, 2025, the Tennessee Supreme Court issued a death warrant, officially scheduling her execution for exactly 1 year later, September 30th, 2026. If the execution proceeds, Pike will become the first woman executed in Tennessee since 1820, when a woman named Martin Eve was hanged as an accessory to murder. She would also be only the 19th woman executed in modern U.S. history since 1976. Pike's time on death row has not been without incident. In 2004, she was convicted of attempting to strangle a fellow inmate, earning an additional 25-year sentence on top of her death penalty. For most of her 30 years in custody, she has been the only woman on Tennessee's death row, a circumstance her attorneys argued amounted to unconstitutional solitary confinement. A lawsuit led to a settlement in September 2024, allowing Pike more opportunities for social interaction. For Mae Martinez, Colleen Slemmer's mother, the approaching execution date brings mixed emotions. She has waited nearly 30 years for finality in a case that destroyed her family. "I would like Tennessee to hear my plea and finally end this after 30 years, Martinez told media outlets. Slemmer would be 50 years old if she were alive today. Pike recently turned 49. For Krista to keep on having appeals and keep going back and forth with the court and everything, it is hard. It really is, Martinez explained. She emphasized that the difficult chapter cannot truly close until the execution is complete. Once it's completely done and everything is over with, it will be closed. The case has reignited debates about capital punishment in Tennessee and nationwide. Opponents of the death penalty point to Pike's youth, trauma history, and mental illness, arguing that executing her serves no legitimate purpose beyond retribution. Supporters counter that the brutality of her crime, the prolonged torture of a helpless victim, the trophy-taking, the bragging, demonstrates a level of depravity that warrants the ultimate punishment regardless of her age or background. Tennessee recently resumed executions after a pause to review lethal injection protocols. The state now uses pentobarbital as its sole execution drug. Pike, having committed her crime before January 1999, is technically eligible to choose electrocution instead of lethal injection, though she has not publicly indicated which method she would select. As September 2026 approaches, legal challenges will almost certainly continue. Pike's attorneys will likely file additional motions, possibly seeking clemency or intervention from federal courts. The execution is not guaranteed to proceed on schedule. Death penalty cases often face last-minute stays and delays. But for now, Krista Gale Pike remains housed at the Tennessee Prison for Women in Nashville, awaiting a date with the state's execution chamber. Her case stands as a complex intersection of youth, mental illness, childhood trauma, and unspeakable violence. A case that forces uncomfortable questions about who deserves to die for their crimes, and whether society can ever truly balance justice with mercy. Colleen Slemmer never got to turn her life around. She never graduated from Job Corps, never pursued her dreams, never experienced the future she deserved. Her family has carried that loss for 3 decades. Whether Krista Pike's execution provides them genuine closure or simply adds another death to the tragedy remains to be seen. What is certain is that on a cold January night in 1995, 2 young lives intersected in a wooded area in Knoxville, and only one walked away. The consequences of those 30 minutes have echoed through the Tennessee criminal justice system for nearly 3 decades and will culminate one way or another in September 2026.